You know, Hollow Knight Silksong is a game that you play when you reach that point in your life where you've basically just given up and have nothing to live for.
Hello and welcome back to another Silksong video. Today I'm going to be playing a classic game, Rage Bait or Rager, where I go through a few wonderful reviews of Silksong and I do a little bit of responding. Now I'm going to start off this video by saying that while I did really like Silksong, I had a few problems with it, and I don't think it is wrong to criticize the game. However, these reviews go beyond being negative and, in my opinion, are really bad, and I think you'll agree. So let's go ahead and shovel some slop. Subscribe. Also, look out for Silksong spoilers. I will be spoiling the entire game, so if you haven't played it, then get out of here. This first video is by Young Defiant, and I'm not gonna lie, he's actually just very funny. Like, he's approaching this review with a truly impressive amount of spite.
Maybe you lost your job, your wife, girlfriend, maybe they cheated on you. You know, basically you are just depressed and say, fuck it. I'll do anything at this point. Because there is no way in hell someone who lives a fulfilling life could ever be tempted to touch a game this bad. Games like this honestly just prove how truly dead gaming is. They honestly just prove how pathetic gamers of today are.
Guys, he's gone too far. He insulted gamers.
Just because a game is indie does not make it good. Indie games, in fact, are for broke peasant gamers that can't afford to purchase real games. I'm gaming on a budget ass motherfuckers. That's what indie games do. They just prove that you are gaming on a budget. You're a $15 to $20 gamer. You're a shovelware gamer. You're a free-to-play gamer. In other words, you are a bum.
And okay, I'm like 99% sure this guy hasn't even played the game, as he doesn't really mention any actual details about it. His whole channel is just stuff like this, and honestly it's pretty great. However, this Silksong video does get kinda repetitive as it goes on, as he keeps repeating the same old lines about how he's better than everybody, and it eventually gets a bit old. So for Young Defiant, I'd recommend having a little bit more research into your subject so that you can hate more accurately and better. But anyways, I'm gonna have to give this a solid A tier on the tier list. Truly a masturbator of the rage variety. And also, if you're interested, I just rolled out memberships for this channel. Basically, what you'll get for a membership is your name shouted out in the video, access to future videos early, and maybe some other cool stuff, I don't know yet. But yeah, any support is really appreciated. Next up is an honest review of Hollow Knight Silksong by Lord Frogmire. And with a title like that, I'm honestly looking forward to watching it. So let's watch the video.
After 7 long years, Silksong has finally released, and to near universal acclaim. In fact, it's been so positively received that the game had over 500 positive reviews 10 minutes after the game came out. Now, personally, I think you should have to play a game before you review it, but maybe the menu is just that impressive.
Honestly, he's off to a very good point. It's pretty goofy that you can review a Steam game with literally no hours in it. But on the other hand, Steam reviews often just cover if there are serious problems with crashing or whatever for the game. And honestly, I can't imagine getting all your opinions from the reviews, as most of them do just suck. So overall, I think it would be rough to require a minimum amount of playtime for reviews, so while it is a fair complaint, I don't really know how to solve the problem it's talking about. Whatever.
Most of the reviews are from people who have not finished the game, and even that is being generous. Most of these people have barely experienced anything this game has to offer, just enough to confirm that it is in fact a new Hollow Knight game. They're letting the hype talk for them, not their brain. So because of the discourse surrounding this game being so muddied by hype, I'm making this video as objective as I can. I'm simply going to go through the positives, then the negatives, and only once we're done will I go into my feelings about how they affect the game and color the whole experience, and let you know if it was worth the wait, if it'll be one of the greatest games ever made, or if it ends up being the most overhyped game of all time and forever live in Hollow Knight's shadow.
I think it's a bit strange how he paints all the other reviews out at the time is from people who are biased, but then follows it up with a statement that his will be objective. I mean, I guess I just don't really believe in objective faults in art. Outside of like crashing and bugs for a game, I don't think objectivity should ever be claimed in a review. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that a reviewer's bias is a large part of the reason for a review to exist in the first place. I like hearing what people have to say about art and how they justify their thoughts. Either way though, I don't think this intro is super important, so I'll try to ignore it as the video goes on. I just kinda personally disagree with the whole objectivity thing. But let's see what pros and cons he brings up.
This game controls so much better. And this is not to say that the controls in Hollow Knight were bad, it's that they were simple. Silksong just has more interesting movement than the original ever did, all the way down to the base moveset of Hornet, the main character. In the original game, one of the main mechanics used for both platforming and fighting was the downward slash, a pogo. Very simple, very effective, easy to use, seen in many other games, most prominently Shovel Knight. But now in Silksong, your pogo, rather than a direct downward slash, you now dash downward at an angle, and if you hit anything within a set period of time, you will then pogo off of it. And although a minor change, this adds a lot of complexity and a lot more thought into how you're going to use this for platforming and in combat. It is very easy to tell if something is directly below you. It is much harder to memorize the angle, draw that line in your head in the midst of combat, and know exactly how long it's going to be active. Because if something is too far away from you, even if it's at the correct angle, you will still take damage if you don't intersect with them in time. By the end of the game, I had no problem pogoing off anything. I know I said I'd leave my feelings for the end, but I just have to say how much more fun this is.
And I totally agree that Silksong's controls are incredible and a great evolution of the original game. It's what makes me prefer it over the original game, honestly. However, and I'm actually going to criticize Silksong here, I think the game could have done a little bit of a better job with two main things. One, I think some training wheels would have really helped ease players in. For example, perhaps a tool that you can use that takes up a slot, but also more clearly visualizes the direction and length of the pogo, just as something you can use early on and then remove once you want to get more tools and you've mastered the pogo. Or you can just leave it on forever if you're bad. But even if you don't really like that first idea, I think it can be easily agreed upon that it's a little hard to tell whenever the attack ends. A more noticeable particle or sound effect would have helped with the timing and spacing. Overall, I think a game should usually try its best to properly teach players its mechanics, and even if it is a difficult game, give clear feedback whenever players mess up so they can figure out what they're doing wrong and how to improve it. Of course, this doesn't apply to all games. Some of them are obtuse or just really annoying on purpose. So again, objectivity is pretty much impossible to really get. But as a player and game designer myself, I would have personally preferred a little more help with the movement early on. And getting back to Frogmere, he's actually got a fairly long list of positives like this about the game, and I agree with just about all of them. So check out the original video by him if you want to hear him, but let's get contentious.
Here's some things I'm just neutral on. The story, it's like slightly more involved than the original game, but still not much. The main character being able to talk doesn't really add anything, but it doesn't really take anything away either. I don't think removing all of the dialogue would improve the game. It is nice to have some flavor, but I honestly don't think I would notice if they did.
I heavily disagree. Hornet being a more involved character than the Knight is fantastic in my opinion. And I think the Silksong has really interesting themes of motherhood, religion, and empathy throughout his story. I think the gameplay stands by itself, and you can totally ignore it, but I think the game did a very good job of developing the characters with as little dialogue as there is in the game. And if you want to hear me talk more about this, then you can watch my video essay. Yeah, I'm showing my own stuff here, I don't care.
As an added part of your moveset, Hornet can now use tools, which are basically sub-weapons from Castlevania, and they're fine. They use a secondary resource that's kind of like money, so I really only use them when that resource was maxed out, because I'm one of those people who saves everything for the final boss. And despite doing that, I didn't even use them on the final boss, because it uses this limited resource even if you die, so I didn't want to waste it on attempts that might not have succeeded, and I just kind of beat the boss having never used it. Oh well. Not to say they're useless, they seem really good, it's just not really my playstyle.
Yeah, I do think that if they just made tools free, I think the game would have been heavily improved. I personally hate anything that punishes you for taking multiple attempts on a boss encounter in a game like this, as I feel the punishment should just be being stuck on the boss. I don't think that I should have to go farm random enemies in order to have a more interesting playstyle on the bosses. This is also my biggest problem with Sekiro, one of my favorite games ever. Although shells in Silksong require way more grinding to use a normal amount in combat. I don't know, it just de-incentivizes some of the most interesting parts of the game, and I think it could be balanced by simply nerfing the tools a bit, or honestly, they're already kind of limited by just having to refresh them whenever you go back. So I think just removing the cost would honestly not have a big impact.
What ties into this is the complaint that everything does 2 damage. It's not everything, it's just most things. Basically, every attack does 2 damage. But if you just walk into an enemy or some traps will do 1. I think this is perfectly reasonable considering you can have what's essentially infinite health. As long as you keep hitting your target and you know when you're allowed to heal, you have infinity health. So who cares if it does 2 damage? If it doesn't kill you in 1 hit, you're fine. There's also the complaint of no checkpoints before bosses, that you have to run past a bunch of enemies rather than just getting to try the boss again immediately, which I'll just tell you this. If you're needing to do that, you just need to look a little closer for the checkpoints. There's almost always a bench near a boss. The run back should really never be more than 30 seconds, which you need that time to breathe and relax and think about what you're supposed to be learning. And those are probably the most common complaints I've been hearing. Not too big of a surprise that most of them have to do with difficulty, given this game is harder than the original.
So this review was actually released before any of the patches of Silksong came out, back when just about everything actually did 2 hits of damage. And yeah, I think he's just wrong. Colliding with a boss usually did 2 hits of damage, and lots of environmental dangers also did 2 damage. They've since reduced a lot of things like this down to 1 damage, and I think it was honestly a great choice. Obviously it makes the game easier, but more importantly, I think that it feels a lot less annoying now, especially the platforming sections. As for the runbacks, I might be in the minority here, but I don't care how easy the runback is. Even if it's 30 seconds long, it just absolutely ruins just about any boss fight for me. Boss fights in a game like Silksong are all about learning moves and getting into a good flow, and being booted back and having to waste a bunch of time just feels horrible to me. Last Judge is the obvious offender. Is there a difficult boss who has a long run back, even if you take the optimal route? Ultimately, I just think it's a waste of time. I don't mind spending a lot of time exploring or taking lots of tries to beat a boss, but having to do the same platforming challenge while avoiding the same annoying enemies over and over is just something I'll never enjoy in a game. And also, I certainly don't find it relaxing. If I need a break, I just don't really see the game design reason for a run back outside of just punishing the player for dying to a boss, in a game where it's expected that you're going to die to bosses quite a few times.
The beginning of this game is rough. It's just slow, and I mean real slow. You're at basically no risk of dying. The bosses are very simple. You have no movement abilities. So you're basically waddling through the world at a snail's pace, fighting enemies that have way too much health and will never kill you if you're paying any attention at all. The first boss of the game, I did not intentionally dodge a single attack, and I beat it on my first try. The beginning of this game is made for people who have never played Hollow Knight before, which is very strange given it's a sequel. In fact, I'd argue it's for people who've never even played a video game before. It's that basic. But given how many people seem to think this game's super hard, maybe that was necessary. But it's certainly not for me. Actually, probably the best counterpoint to what I just said is I saw a review complaining about how hard the Bell Beast was, a boss I beat on my first try on stream, where I got to 1 health, was fucking around, reading chat, then I lock in and never take any damage again, which characterizes the entire beginning of the game. As long as you're paying any attention at all, there is nothing to engage with, there are no problems.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. This guy's getting kind of annoying. He just seems to really believe that he's just so good at games. This game's too easy and that the average player is just too stupid or bad at games in order to actually have an opinion on the game worth listening to. I don't know. I feel like this video was set up to be an honest review. Instead, it's kind of turning into this weird self-masturbatory spiel, and I don't like that.
The problem that permeates the entire game is that every boss has 2 phases, which, why is that a problem? That sounds pretty cool. Well, first of all, the second phase of a boss is a lot more interesting when it's a surprise. When it's like, oh, thank God, I finally beat it, and then, oh my God, he's actually even stronger now. But when every boss has 2 phases, it's not surprising, and it's a lot less exciting. But that's not the real issue. The real issue is the second phase is basically always the real fight. The first phase is so easy and so simple that it's basically a cutscene that you have to sit through before you get to the fun part. This is especially bad when you've lost to a boss a bunch of times, and every time you want to retry the part you failed, you have to run your way all the way back to the boss, sit through the opening cutscene of the boss, then play through a full phase that you will never die to, and it doesn't even matter how much damage you take because you have infinite healing. And this part's so easy that you will always always have full silk by the time you get to the second phase. In fact, if you don't have full silk, the phase transition gives you time to hit the boss to then get to full silk, making that first phase essentially pointless. Now, not every boss has a bad first phase, but at the very least, the vast majority are so significantly easier than their second, more interesting phase that they would be better off removed.
I think that the boss fights in Silksong are largely about conserving resources. In Silksong, the challenge is first learning the first phase, then mastering it so you can get to the second phase with full silk. Even if the first phase is so easy for Lord Gamer Frogmire that he does it on complete autopilot, you would then think it really wouldn't be much of a problem, as then he could just beat the second phase in a few tries without too much effort. Most second phases just add an extra attack, or maybe a few extra effects to each attack. They aren't really a huge rework of the boss like he acts like they are. As for the complaint that it's no longer a surprise, I mean, yeah, I don't think it's supposed to be a surprise. You're kind of comparing very different boss fights to each other. Like in Sekiro, whenever it looks like you're about to defeat a certain boss, and then he stands up behind you and kills you, that's a surprise. No other boss has done that at this point, and he also did the whole death animation thing already. It's playing with your expectations around their boss fights, but in Silksong, there aren't expectations that the boss will just end whenever it starts shaking the screen. This happens every time. And in general, no bosses in Silksong have visible health bars, much less stage counters. And because of this, you're basically always expecting a second phase. So I feel like it's less of an annoyance and more of an understood part of the game's design language. No different than multi-wave rooms or returning to an area a second time when you have more abilities. I mean, I guess you could be personally annoyed by it, but I don't really understand why.
The majority of enemies are very simple and have a lot of health, meaning while you're fighting them, you have long since mastered their patterns before you even kill one, let alone the 10-20 that you end up killing over the course of the game. This gets better throughout the game as the enemies become more complex and you get damage upgrades so they're not so tanky, but I'd say for the majority of the game, enemies give too little rewards and have too much health to be worth fighting at all. So for the most part, you just run past them, and they're only worth fighting to either fill out your beast journal or to get some silk back to heal.
While I personally wouldn't go as far to say that enemies aren't worth fighting, I do agree that they can be a bit too tanky. But overall, I honestly thought that there were a lot of interesting designs for enemies throughout the game, with most enemies having at least a few patterns, and a lot of them doing interesting things with the environment that they're in, like laying traps or blending in.
Although I have some other minor gripes with the game, I really only have one more big problem, and that it's simply too similar to Hollow Knight, which is kind of an odd thing to say about a sequel, especially given I praised all of the differences already. It's just weird because this should be Team Cherry taking their training weights off. Hollow Knight was their first game, so now you'd think with Silksong they would have learned a lot. They now have as much money as they could want. They certainly took as much time as they needed, and yet for the most part, it's just more Hollow Knight. It's not even any bigger than Hollow Knight is. That's what you want from a sequel, bigger and better, but if you include the DLC, it's probably smaller than the original. It took me 14 hours to beat the game, and although I didn't do everything, I also wasn't going very fast. So despite not really being hyped for the game, I still expected a greater leap from the first game. At least something more grand, something that showed that more time and more money went into the game, and I just don't see it.
That's a bit of a weird complaint. I mean, I wouldn't say the game's super short. In fact, the map was like way bigger in the original. I wonder why someone would think that.
It's funny, if you ask any Hollow Knight fan, they'll tell you it's the best Metroidvania ever, it's one of the greatest games ever, but if you ask a fan of Metroidvanias who's just played a lot of this type of game, they'll say it's okay at best. Narelle famously reviews a ton of Metroidvanias, and people lost their mind when he gave it a 7 out of 10. But that seems to be the common opinion among people who have played a lot of games in general, because Hollow Knight is baby's first Metroidvania. It is very easy. It is so funny how many people are saying Hollow Knight is tough but fair, and then complaining about Silksong's difficulty. The reality is Silksong is not much more difficult than Hollow Knight, it's just not so basic. I just wonder what you think is more likely, that a team of 3 people making their first game together somehow makes the greatest game of all time, or maybe you just don't have enough experience with games.
So this is just hearsay. And also, I think that Frogmire really is exaggerating how easy Hollow Knight is and how hard the average Metroidvania is. I personally haven't played an insane amount of Metroidvanias, but I played Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, Metroid Dread, Castlevania Rise of Shadows, and Nine Souls, and I'd say that Hollow Knight is harder than all those other games except for Nine Souls, especially if you include the DLC stuff. I don't think the average Metroidvania is that difficult. Maybe if you start going back to like NES stuff, it's difficult, but that's mostly just because it's a janky NES game. But either way, I still think it's very fair to say that Hollow Knight is one of the most praised Metroidvanias of all time, and definitely the most praised one from the last decade. And I do think this is just kind of a weird tangent, as he's basically saying that if you are a truly seasoned Metroidvania gamer, then you can see past the facade of Hollow Knight for the true mediocrity that it is. It's fine if you just think the game's okay, but my main problem with this video is that Lord Frogmire seems to draw an immense amount of pleasure from feeling superior to others. And I'd argue this is less of an actual honest review of Silksong and more like a 1000 RPM dick weighting contest.
Nah, dog. This game ain't it. It's okay. It's a mediocre Metroidvania, nothing special at all. Honestly, most of the praise I gave this game was painful to do. I could barely do it with a straight face because it felt like patting a child on the back. This is the bare minimum. Oh man, the areas are slightly different. Oh, sometimes you can tell rooms apart. The bosses aren't all shit. Here's one good one.
Wow, this guy is smug.
You know how I said the beginning of the game was slow, easy, and boring, not interesting at all? Yeah, by beginning, I meant about 75% of the game. The game is Act 1 and Act 2. Act 1 is basically all bad, and it's the majority of the game. Once the game gets interesting, it's basically over.
Plot twist. Yeah, this guy played to Act 2, got the ending, and was done. Spoiler alert, not that this guy cared to give any whenever he openly spoiled Grandmother Silk earlier, but there were 3 acts. So, Lord Frogmire, who started off this video complaining about how other reviewers didn't finish the game before reviewing, didn't finish the game. This was probably a simple mistake, but honestly at this point I don't care. He spent so much time being an unlikable prick that I guess he didn't have any time to do any research before blasting the game for being too short. He did play a decent amount of the game, and it's enough to have a normal review on it. But as you'll soon see, basically all of his criticisms going forward are going to get way more harsh and also way more hard to listen to, knowing that he missed a huge chunk in the game.
You get one cool platforming challenge, one cool boss, and then it's over. I called this shit perfectly. They were not working on this game for 7 years. They did not spend $30 million on the game. I don't think they spent any more money on this game than they spent on Hollow Knight. And I don't think they spent any more time on it either. Remember, they already had the foundations of the first game, and Silksong is about 90% the same, so it should take less time to make more content, or if they weren't going to make more content, it should be significantly different from the first game, which it isn't. So how could it take this long? The answer is it didn't. I guarantee you, they made a shit ton of money, decided they never were going to work again. At some point, for whatever reason, they felt the pressure to release Silksong, so they rushed the development in a year, maybe 2, and then they just shat out the game when they felt like they needed money. This game's just Tears of the Kingdom all over again, where you have this extremely long wait from a critically acclaimed game that had significant flaws, and now none of those flaws are addressed. The game is barely any different, and everyone's just left wondering, what the fuck took so long? What were you doing? The answer is nothing. Not that any of this matters though, given, as I said at the beginning of the video, people gave this game positive reviews before they even turned it on. They saw the menu and were like 10 out of 10. So who the fuck cares what the game is? The developers probably felt the same way. They're like, why even spend time on this shit? They'll love it anyway. And for any of you Hollow Knight losers that are still watching, I just spoiled the final boss for you. Get fucked.
I mean, I feel like he's just digging his own grave here. Like, yeah, Team Cherry could have just retired after Hollow Knight. They could have also taken a 5-year break and then came back and acted like they didn't. But 1, they didn't, and 2, what does that have to do with the quality of the final game? Team Cherry didn't owe anybody a massive new game in a certain amount of time, so complaining that your $20 game is only 16 hours long, while also missing the last act. Frogmire, if people are angry at you for this video, I'm sure that some of them are real white Hollow Knights who would do anything for Mommy Hornet. I do think that Lord Frogmire has done quite a bit to draw the mire of most reasonable people. This review is painful to watch, but with that said, don't go spam his comments or anything. He was critical of the game and was mildly pompous. He doesn't deserve harassment for this. In fact, spam my comments instead. I need that sweet interaction.
Both of these shit games commit the greatest crime of all, which is just being boring. They're just so basic. There's only so much you can do with a 2D action platformer, and I still don't think they hit that bar. You know, I think people often ask, how can suffering exist in the world if God is benevolent? Well, if you ask me, suffering is the proof that God is benevolent, because the people who sit here and pretend a piece of shit game is the greatest thing they've ever played, and only through sheer ignorance and stupidity, those people should suffer. God gave us suffering so those bugmen could be punished for existing. I sleep well at night knowing bad things are happening to insect people every day. Anyway, 7.5 out of 10. Pretty good game. I liked it. Had fun. See you next time. Bye.
I went into this video expecting a, well, honest review of Hollow Knight Silksong, and I think that it mostly started that way. But man, I must have lost the plot somewhere along the way, because what is going on? I think this is a case of a few things. One, a reviewer who rushed through the game, missed tons of things, and so is disappointed in the exploration. And two, I think he was trying to be funny in this video, and yeah, there were actually some good jokes in there, but he really went off the deep end by the end. Ultimately, what I believe happened was that in response to some annoying stuff coming out of Silksong fanbase, like the early reviews and denial of any flaws of the game, Frogman went so far in the other direction that he just turned into a strange stereotype of someone who believes that their skill at video games makes them superior to all the other plebeians, which was admittedly pretty interesting to watch unfold. Lightning Round. Legendary Badass. Actually, this guy is a real grinder, as he dropped a super negative review of Hollow Knight way back whenever it came out, and he still came back for the sequel.
Just when you thought it was safe to go back in the Game Pass, Team Cherry drops on us Hollow Knight Silksong, the sequel to the award-stealing Hollow Knight from 2018. Why they've been working on this game long enough, you would think it would have maybe some features that the original didn't. Online co-op? Nope.
I mean, I find it hard to believe this is actually what he wanted from a sequel to Hollow Knight. This just seems like a guy coming up with bogus complaints in order to throw together a video for hate views. I mean, he's basically been doing this for a decade. The video is hitting on everything from cyberpunk edge runners to Obama to black people not being able to hear smoke alarms to the boys for becoming woke. So now I'm just going to play a couple of the funniest complaints in the video.
Because it's not just enough to die in a room where all of a sudden some Indian guy, map maker, wants to help you, but he slows down the frame rate and then the screen's pausing and you can't stay alive. You got to spend 30 minutes getting back there every single time you die. I feel like I'm on freaking crazy pills here. Not only does it not feel like a sequel, it's DLC where you just play as a new character. But not even a new character. It's like when you beat a game back in the day and it was like, okay, you beat Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, you get to play Splinter. It's like that. It's like, okay, a character whose sprite's already in the game, now you get to be them. Does she have a tactical role, slide, anything? I feel like I'm on freaking crazy pills here. Team Cherry brought nothing new to the table. They didn't even hire voice actors. I'm over here having to voice all the damn characters myself for the 3 people watching.
Oh, ho, 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 ferocious, yeah, intimidating. Yours is no pilgrim spirit. You're the bearer of a hunter.
Are those her boobs hanging down here? Like what's happening over here with the bug shell lady? I feel like I'm on freaking crazy pills here.
Okay, lightning round over. Yeah, it was only one video, but I'm tired of this. So, what did we learn? Well, let's consult the tier list. Oh yeah, but you forgot about that, because I did too. Moving on. Perhaps the real honest Silksong review was the time we wasted along the way. But that's all. So if you want to watch a much better video, then check out my Silksong video essay. And if you want to watch another response, this time to a single horrifying Deltarune review, then watch this video. And once again, if you want to support the channel, then you can join as a member. But thanks for watching. Bye.